I told my husband I was pregnant, and he said I ruined his life. That same night, he packed his bags and left for his intern. His parents, they defended him, said, "He's too young for a family." I raised our son alone through tears, sleepless nights, and every scraped knee. 5 years later, that man came back, begging to meet the boy he abandoned. My son looked him in the eyes and said, "Dad." But not to him. This is not just a story of betrayal. It's a story of strength, healing, and the sweetest revenge. I'll never forget the way he looked at me that night, like I was the mistake that ruined his perfect little life. We were sitting in the kitchen. I was trembling. He was scrolling through his phone like I hadn't just dropped the biggest news of our lives. "I'm pregnant, Daniel," I said, voice shaking but eyes hopeful. He didn't look up right away. He just paused, locked his phone, and looked at me like I'd killed his dog. "You're pregnant," he repeated, like the word tasted wrong in his mouth. Then he stood up, didn't say a word, walked out of the kitchen and came back a minute later with his car keys. "I can't do this, Emily," he finally said, and I swear my heart cracked open. "You ruined my life." I froze. The room spun. "I ruined your life?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "What the hell are you talking about? We've been married for 2 years." He wouldn't even look at me. "I told you I wasn't ready for this. You knew. You knew what this would mean for me. I just started my residency. I have a future. And I'm not going to throw it away because you forgot to take a pill." That's when it hit me. The disdain. The coldness. The way he blamed me like I tricked him into something horrifying. I wasn't a wife to him. I was a liability. "Where are you going?" I asked, standing now, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that this man I loved, had turned into a stranger in seconds. He didn't answer. He just walked out the door. I found out the next day where he went. Or should I say who he went to? Her name was Alyssa, a med school intern, 23, blonde, bright, desperate for a mentor. He'd been mentoring her for months. But what gutted me wasn't that he left me for another woman. It was how easily he did it. Like I was never anything more than a detour on his path to success. His parents came over the day after. Not to comfort me, not to help, but to explain. "He's still young," his mother said, her tone full of soft disapproval for me. "You have to understand, Emily. A child is a huge responsibility." I remember looking at her, this woman who once called me daughter, and seeing nothing but quiet disgust behind her carefully painted smile. "Maybe if you hadn't pressured him into marriage so soon," she added. I laughed. I actually laughed because it was the only thing I could do to keep from breaking down. "You know what?" I said, gripping the edges of the kitchen counter just to stay upright. "Get out. Both of you. Get the hell out of my house." They left in a huff, muttering something about how ungrateful I was. And just like that, I was alone, pregnant, divorced, alone. Those first few months were the darkest I've ever lived through. I moved out of our apartment in Boston because I couldn't walk through that hallway without remembering the last night we were together. The night he left. I got a 1-bedroom across the river in Cambridge. Took freelance design gigs. Ate noodles 3 nights a week. Cried every single night into the same pillow. And then, I met him. No, not him. Not Daniel. I met Liam. He wasn't perfect. But he was kind, gentle, quietly supportive. He was the tech guy at a coffee shop I worked from sometimes. We bonded over a busted Wi-Fi router and a shared love for sad indie music. He didn't push. He didn't run. He just showed up. When my water broke 5 months later, he was the one who drove me to the hospital. He held my hand through 17 hours of labor. He stayed even when the nurses asked, "Are you the father?" And he said quietly, "Not yet." He was there when I held my son for the first time. No, our son. I named him Jacob, but Liam called him Buddy from the start. He fed him when I couldn't keep my eyes open. He rocked him through every fever, every nightmare. He was there for the firsts, first steps, first words, first time Jacob looked up at him and called him Dad. And then 5 years later Daniel showed up. It was a crisp October morning. Jacob was in preschool. I was sipping coffee on the porch when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and froze. Daniel. Older. slightly thinner, a little more gray at the temples, but those same cold eyes. He looked at me like he'd been punched. Emily, he breathed. Can we talk? I didn't answer. I just stepped aside, let him in, watched him scan the living room like he was searching for ghosts. I heard, he began, his voice cracking. I heard I have a son. I didn't nod, didn't speak, just stared at him, arms crossed. He sighed, sat on the edge of the couch like he didn't deserve to sink all the way in. I was a coward, he whispered. I panicked. I was selfish and stupid, and I left you when you needed me most. There was silence, long, heavy. I want to meet him, he finally said. Please. I didn't say no, but I didn't say yes either. Instead I said, come back tomorrow, after school. He gets home at 3. I needed time, not to forgive, not to process. I needed time to make a decision, one that would either open a door or close it forever. The next day, 2:55 p.m., I sat on the couch with a pit in my stomach. Jacob's bus would be pulling up any minute, and Daniel was sitting in the armchair across from me, gripping his knees like they might run away if he didn't hold them down. He hadn't said much since he arrived, just a weak hello and a glance around the living room like he was trying to find proof that time had stood still, that somehow the last 5 years didn't count because he wasn't here for them. I watched him from across the room, the man who once called me his world, who then turned around and called our child a mistake. Now he sat there trying to look like a father. I heard the bus brakes squeal. My heart stopped. I stood up. Jacob's here. Daniel stood too, face pale. Should I stay seated? Should I stand? What do I? Don't force it, I said bluntly. He doesn't know you. You're a stranger to him. Act accordingly. He nodded like a scolded teenager. The door creaked open a minute later, and Jacob burst in with his usual energy, backpack half unzipped, curls bouncing, cheeks pink from the fall air. Mom! He yelled, running toward me, wrapping his arms around my legs. Hey baby! I smiled, bending down to kiss his head. There's someone here I want you to meet. He looked up, eyes wide. Daniel took a small step forward. Hey there, buddy. I'm Daniel. Jacob stared at him, blinking. Then, from behind him, footsteps. Liam walked through the door, holding Jacob's forgotten lunchbox. You left this in the car, bud. And that's when it happened. Jacob turned and ran full speed to Liam, grabbing his hand, eyes bright. Dad! Look! He brought my lunchbox. Daniel's face collapsed. Liam gave a confused glance to me, then noticed Daniel standing awkwardly in the living room. Oh, he said softly. Didn't realize you had company. Jacob, I said gently. This is Daniel. He's someone from my past. I didn't call him his father. I didn't lie. But I didn't explain either. Daniel took a cautious step forward. Jacob. I'm actually. But Jacob was already talking over him. Wanna come see my Legos? Dad helped me build a dragon yesterday. He tugged Liam toward his bedroom. Come on, Dad. Daniel just stood there frozen. I swear I heard his heart break. But mine didn't soften. Not for a second. After Jacob disappeared into his room with Liam, Daniel finally spoke. He calls him Dad? His voice was brittle like glass ready to shatter. Yes, I said, arms crossed. He does. Because Liam's the one who earned that title. He doesn't even know who I am. You gave up that right the night you walked out. I didn't know what I was doing, Emily. Don't, I snapped, and my voice shook with 5 years of suppressed rage. Don't you dare try to rewrite history. You said I ruined your life. You left. You started a new one. So did I. But the difference is mine includes our son. He rubbed his face, voice cracking. I want to be a part of his life. I looked at him, really looked, and for a second I saw the boy I fell in love with once, lost, impulsive, scared. But I wasn't that girl anymore. You want to be? Or you think you should be? I asked. Because those are very different things. He didn't answer. I sighed. You can't just show up and expect to step into his life like nothing happened. You weren't there for the colic, the nightmares, the hospital runs, the scraped knees and the broken crayons. But I want to try, he said. Please, Emily. Just a chance. I looked at the doorway where Jacob's giggles echoed from down the hall. Then you start small. Supervised visits. No dad talk. No surprises. You build trust. Not with me. With him. His eyes filled with tears. He nodded. The first few weeks were awkward. Daniel came over twice a week. He brought puzzles, soccer balls, books he thought 5-year-olds would like. At first, Jacob barely acknowledged him. Liam stayed in the background, quiet but watchful. Eventually, Jacob started asking Daniel questions. What's your job? Do you have a dog? Why do you talk weird? Daniel answered patiently. He tried. And slowly, something began to shift. One day, Jacob handed him a drawing he made at school. A picture of our family. Stick figures. Crayon scribbles. Me. Liam. Himself. Our dog Oreo. Daniel was in the corner. A figure with a question mark for a face. I found him staring at it in the kitchen later, trying not to cry. I didn't feel pity. I felt relief. Relief that maybe he was finally understanding. Months passed. And Daniel did something I didn't expect. He kept showing up. Not perfectly. Not heroically. But steadily. And Jacob started warming to him. They'd read books together. Go for short walks. Paint silly faces. But he never once called him Dad. One day, Daniel asked to speak with me privately. We sat on the back porch. Spring had come early. I've been thinking, he said. I'll never be what Liam is to Jacob. I get that now. I stayed silent, letting him finish. But I'd like to be something. Maybe not Dad. Maybe just Daniel. Maybe just a man who made a horrible mistake and is trying not to repeat it. I looked at him long and hard. And for the first time in years I said the words, "Thank you for saying that." And meaning it. He nodded, eyes glassy. A year later, Jacob started calling him Danny. His own little nickname. And that was enough. Daniel showed up for school plays, soccer games, parent-teacher meetings, sometimes sitting 2 rows behind Liam but always there. And you know what? It was enough. Because I realized the real revenge wasn't watching Daniel suffer. It was living a life so full of love, it made his absence irrelevant. The day Jacob turned 7, I watched him blow out the candles on a dinosaur-shaped cake. His cheeks puffed, eyes shut tight with that focused little wish face only kids make. The backyard was strung with fairy lights. Kids were running wild with foam swords. Liam was at the grill. Daniel was awkwardly helping set up folding chairs. It was strange. Not in a bad way. Just surreal. The 2 men from the most painful chapters of my life now stood on the same patch of grass, orbiting around the same bright little star. I remember stepping back for a moment, just watching, absorbing it all like some scene from a movie I couldn't have written if I tried. But this wasn't fiction. This was my life. Messy. Earned. Mine. After the kids were settled, after the last cupcake was devoured and the gift bags were handed out, the backyard quieted down. Jacob sat on Liam's lap, flipping through a dinosaur encyclopedia like it was a treasure map. Daniel came up beside me, holding 2 paper cups of lemonade. "Thanks," I said, taking one. "You did a great job with this," he said, glancing around the twinkling yard. I smiled faintly. "Thanks. It's not easy keeping a herd of 7-year-olds alive for 2 hours." He chuckled. "I meant more than the party." I turned to him. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward Jacob. "All of it. He's incredible." I nodded, swallowing the lump that rose in my throat. "He is." Daniel stared into his cup like it held answers. Then he said quietly, "You know, sometimes I lie awake at night wondering what kind of man I would have been if I'd stayed." I looked at him, not bitterly, not sharply, just honestly. "And sometimes I lie awake wondering who Jacob would be if you had." He flinched. But he didn't argue. Because the truth hung heavy between us. And truth isn't always kind. "I'm glad he has you," Daniel finally said, voice breaking. "And Liam. And this whole life I never even deserved to witness." I nodded again, this time with something softer behind it. "You made a terrible choice, Daniel. But you've been trying. And Jacob sees that, even if he doesn't fully understand it yet." He looked at me, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "Do you think one day he'll forgive me?" I took a deep breath. "I think he already has. In his own way. But the real question is, can you forgive yourself? Weeks passed. Life settled again. Jacob was thriving. His laugh came from his stomach. He drew monsters and rainbows, and every drawing had 3 people in it, me, Liam, and himself. Sometimes Daniel was added in the corner. Stick figure with big ears and long legs. Danny, it said above the head. Liam never flinched when he saw those. He'd just smile and ruffle Jacob's hair. One night after Jacob went to bed, I sat outside on the porch with Liam. I asked him a question I hadn't dared to before. Do you ever feel weird about him being around? Liam smiled slowly. Not weird. Protective, maybe. But never jealous. I looked at him. You're an incredible man, you know that? He took my hand gently. I didn't do anything special. I just stayed. I just loved you. Loved him. And that's when I broke. Tears fell without warning. Years of pain, rage, loneliness, betrayal, slowly dissolving in the warmth of everything I had now. I leaned into Liam's chest and he held me like he always had, like I was whole even when I wasn't. Like I was enough. Months later, Jacob had a school assignment. Who's your hero? He stood at the front of his classroom, holding a paper with crayon scribbles and big block letters. My hero is my dad, he said proudly. Daniel smiled faintly in the back row. He thought it was about him. But then Jacob held up a drawing of Liam. Big hands. Glasses. His favorite hoodie. Because he makes pancakes and never misses my games and gives the best hugs. He didn't have to love me, but he did anyway. There wasn't a dry eye in that room. Daniel clapped with everyone else. Later outside he walked up to me with red eyes and a hollow smile. I thought he meant me, he said quietly. He meant his dad, I said softly. You're part of his world, Daniel. But Liam is his world. He nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. And somehow he did. A year later, Daniel moved to Chicago. He got a job at a teaching hospital. Sent postcards. Called on birthdays. Visited during holidays. He never tried to replace anyone. Never claimed a title he didn't earn. He just became what he should have been all along, a piece, not the whole. And that was enough. Jacob turned 10 last month. He's got Liam's heart, my sarcasm, and a smile that could melt glaciers. One night I tucked him in and he asked, Mom, was Dad always my dad? I smiled. Which one? He grinned. The one who makes pancakes. Yes, I said, brushing his curls back. He always was. He paused. What about the other one? I hesitated, then said, he's a part of your story, but not the whole story. He nodded like he understood more than I thought. Then he whispered, I'm glad my story turned out this way. So am I, baby. So am I.